Hey, welcome back to Overhead Athletics. I'm Max Wardell. We're going to talk a little bit about studies and how they relate injury to biomechanical sequencing in the throw. Recently, what we've seen is an increase in the number of studies that look at various points in the throw and attempt to correlate the positions that the athlete's in to injuries. And I think these are very, very important studies. And the reason is we've had so many studies that look at overuse and the amount of sleep an athlete gets or the amount of throws that they make and how those things correlate to injury. And we have to understand that none of those things are the cause of injury. We have multiple contributing variables to every injury. They may be a contributing variable. We had too many throws done the wrong way. We didn't have enough sleep. We weren't well hydrated. These are all things that can correlate and contribute to injury, but we have to understand that very rarely is there one cause of an injury. These are traumatic events like a car accident type of event. When there's a catastrophic event, we may have one cause of injury, but when we have these athletic injuries that happen over the course of time, ligamentous tears, we have separations of growth plates, epiphyseal lysis, we have all these different things that occur in our throwing athletes, and they don't happen from one specific throw. Generally, they happen as a result of chronic attenuation over time where I continue to place too much stress for too long with not enough recovery in the wrong way on a certain structure, and it becomes injured. It becomes degenerated, it becomes frayed, torn, all those sorts of things. And so we have a study recently that we were just talking about here at the OAI, and I wanted to bring it to your guys' attention. They looked at lateral release point in MLB pitchers and said, okay, we have these guys that are injured with UCL injuries, had to undergo reconstruction. We had these guys who are a control group that weren't injured, and we looked at how lateral the release point is versus how vertical it was. And then they said, okay, this group, the UCL injured group, had much more lateral release point, whereas the healthy group didn't have as lateral of release point, and they were healthy. And we also saw that in the study, in the years preceding, each year that moved closer to that injury, they got more lateral as they went towards that UCL rupture. We have things that we can consider. Is this the cause of the injury? Well, no. Nobody injures their UCL at the release point of the throw. We get injured at two primary points in the throw. We get injured in maximal internal rotation and maximal external rotation. For the elbow, it's typically max external rotation where I have the peak valgus stresses. That's when we overload the ulnar collateral ligament, the epiphyseal plate on the inside of the elbow, where we overload some of these flexor pronator tendons. They get overloaded at the limits of their range of motion when the stress is the highest. Maximal external rotation, forearm layback, valgus is the highest. The tissues are lengthened maximally, compressed maximally on the other side. And so this is where we get injured. And so we see that, okay, this correlated to injury, but is this the reason that athletes got injured? Well, no. It had something to do with how they sequenced the throw when they were in maximal external rotation, valgus stress, and then how many throws they did there. There's many, many variables. Did they coordinate their muscles well to protect their UCL? But what we see is, and what's interesting is if you look into this, you'll see that, okay, the position of my arm at release point slightly relates to the position of my arm during the acceleration phase when I'm in maximum external rotation. If I say, okay, I'm in less elbow flexion, when I get into max ER, my arm lays back, I've put the elbow in an unstable position closer to the open pec position where there's more potential for gapping and shear stress on the inside of the arm. And then I say, okay, the majority of the stress is applied here. These athletes that are out here are more likely to end up more lateral at the release. The lateral release wasn't the causative factor, but rather it was correlated to the factor that was more heavily contributing to injury. So what we see is this is a correlate of this, which is a correlate of injury. So this is indirectly related to injury, and maybe we see that athletes move more lateral because they have attenuation of the ligament and they're trying to protect the joint through moving in a slightly different manner subconsciously. So we see this all the time. So now we have a few things to consider when we look at this study that says, okay, out here is more highly correlated to injury. These guys were more injury prone than these guys, and we say, okay, but why is that? Because this isn't what caused the injury. Well, what caused the injury could have been what where they were earlier in the throw, and then how they move through the throw from that earlier position to that end position may ultimately be the variable that's most important to discover when rehabilitating these athletes. So if we look at this study and we say, okay, if you're more lateral, you're more likely to become injured, then we've taken the wrong approach and we've actually come to the wrong conclusion, which is it's not where I'm at here that's most important. We can go through hundreds of athletes who are out here at the end of the throw, Nolan Ryan, Randy Johnson, to name a couple, who were very healthy through very, very hard, through long time, and through a ton of pitches in each outing, and were relatively healthy throughout their career. And so is it this position, or is it how they got to this position? And you're more likely to end up here if you were in the wrong position earlier in the throw, but you can certainly be in the right position earlier in the throw and still end up more lateral at the end of the throw. And that's largely due to how much side bending you have. It's largely due to whether, hey, I'm at 95 degrees of shoulder elevation versus 90. And so there's all these contributing variables that can relate to how an athlete moves. But if we go into one of these studies and we look at one of these studies that are phenomenal studies, by the way, that have begun to say, you know, how we move matters and how we sequence our throw matters and the positions we're in matter. But if we look at one of these studies where we find a variable that's in a position where we don't really see the injury occur, and then we say, okay, difference here is what matters, well, that contributes to the variable that does matter. So we always have to look a little bit deeper into these studies because it's very hard to identify maximal external rotation moment or peak valgus moment for a variety of throwers. If we have 70 throwers in our study, peak valgus can be at slightly different times, the body's in slightly different positions because each athlete moves differently. There's variance in the study, which doesn't allow us to look at anything except for one instant in time where we can be sure that all the athletes are doing one thing similar, which is releasing the ball in this case. So we have to understand that this is correlated to what's more heavily contributing to injury, and then we can understand that over time we shouldn't necessarily be altering release angle, but more so we should be altering how an athlete sequences the points of peak stress in the throw and coordinates their body through the points of peak stress in the throw. And then if that ends up slightly altering the release point, that's great. If it doesn't, that's great. But what's most important is when the stress is applied and when the athlete is at the limits of their anatomical range of motion. And if we can improve the amount of stress, or if we can alter their coordination or their sequencing at these points in the throw, we're going to have a more significant impact on those athletes' future careers and their health than simply looking at one easy to identify instance in the throw that we can correlate over a ton of throwers and say, okay, if you're more lateral, you're more likely to be injured. We need to alter that, and that's the incorrect conclusion. So let's look at how athletes accelerate the ball. Let's look at the position of injury and understand that there are positions in the throw that relate to previous positions. If I release the ball in a certain spot, it may be due to what I did earlier in the throw and may not be an independent variable. It's largely dependent upon my prior movements and how I initiated the throw. So we plan to go through some more study type analyses like this, but we just wanted to bring this one to you guys' attention because we thought this was a particularly good study in that it was able to actually say these guys threw different than these guys, which is awesome because what you're saying is, okay, we see healthy guys and we see injured guys, and what we're saying is they don't do things the same way. But now we need to say what specifically resulted in their injuries and what specifically did they do differently that resulted in the injury, rather than, hey, we just saw this group was injured, this group was healthy, and we know they move different. At this point, we know that athletes move differently when they're injured and when they're healthy. We need to discover why. And so that's why we're going to keep putting forth these videos and kind of analyzing throwers and breaking them down for you guys. So if you like this video, make sure to hit the thumbs up. Let me know in the comments section, hey, I like this video, what about this study? Give me some suggestions. We're happy to break these things down on video, and subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next video.